My English teacher had assigned these almost draconian contracts for absolute, unwavering silence in class. Yet, with a stunning display of hypocrisy, she handed me detention for a mere whisper in attempt to comfort a classmate suffering a terrifying panic attack while she, oblivious, dispassionately graded papers. Then, there I was in science class, the familiar hum of the fluorescent lights overhead, reaching nonchalantly into my bag for what I absolutely believed was my trusty granola bar. One bite. Just one, and an immediate, visceral jolt of alarm shot through me the taste. That sickeningly sweet, unmistakable, insidious flavor of peanut butter. A cruel twist of fate. Surely my friend's protein bar had somehow gotten mixed up with mine when we were studying together. I need the emergency EpiPen, I gasped, the words already a desperate struggle as I felt an invisible, vice-like grip tightening around my throat. I just ate peanuts. The substitute teacher, a woman whose face was utterly unconcerned, slowly looked up from her desk where she was brazenly snacking from her own bag of peanuts. Don't be so dramatic, she scoffed, dismissing my terror with a casual wave of her hand. Allergies are all in your head, a psychosomatic invention. No, you don't understand, I tried to articulate. But my tongue already felt thick, clumsy, swelling rapidly within my mouth. I had foolishly left my personal EpiPen at home, under the utterly mistaken impression that I'd be safe, secure in the knowledge that every classroom supposedly housed emergency ones. Please, I pleaded, my voice barely a croak, the med cabinet. Sit down, she commanded, her voice chillingly devoid of empathy. She rose slowly, with a deliberate, almost taunting lack of urgency, and walked toward the cabinet. But instead of swinging it open, instead of offering the lifeline I so desperately needed, she simply leaned against it, effectively barricading it. You know what my parents did when I claimed I was allergic to cats? She asked, a smug, self-satisfied smile playing on her lips. They locked me in a room with 3 of them. By morning, I was cured. The implication hung heavy in the air, a sinister promise of her own twisted cure. Katie, a sudden surge of defiant energy propelling her forward, sprang from her desk and sprinted toward the cabinet. She's not faking, she needs help now. But the sub, an unyielding, impenetrable barrier of terrifying conviction, blocked her path. The only thing killing her, she stated, her voice chillingly flat, is her own mind, her own victim mentality. Then she did something that etched an indelible mark on my memory. An act of calculated cruelty I will never, ever forget. She turned from the scene, walked with unnerving calm to the classroom door, extended her hand, and with a definitive, metallic click, turned the deadbolt, securing our confinement. Then, with a casual flick of her wrist, she pocketed the key. No one leaves, she announced, her voice an icy ultimatum, until she admits she's faking it. This victim mentality is destroying your generation. Call 911, someone, a panicked cry in the rising tide of fear, yelled, instinctively reaching for their phone. Phones in the box, now, the sub barked, her eyes sweeping the room with a draconian authority. She snatched up the classroom's designated phone collection box. Hand them over, or you're all suspended. The threat, chillingly disproportionate to the life or death situation, silenced many. My throat felt like an iron band, relentlessly tightening, crushing, suffocating me. 6 minutes. That's all I had, a terrifying, internal countdown before the swelling became irreversible. The number my doctor had made me memorize, now a horrifyingly real deadline. That's when my ex, Daniel, chose to chime in, an opportunistic, treacherous intervention. She pulled the same drama last year. He blurted out a casually cruel dismissal of my agony. The sub's face split into a self-satisfied smile, her eyes glinting with chilling validation. See, she said, almost triumphant, even he knows you're faking. She turned, then, and walked back to my desk, her bag of peanuts still in hand, an ominous prop. My parents, she began, a detached, almost ritualistic anecdote, proved allergies are psychological when I was 5. She then grabbed a generous handful of peanuts from her bag and, with excruciating slowness, with deliberate, sadistic intent, crushed them, grinding the nuts into a fine, insidious dust directly over my desk. Exposure therapy, she declared, almost tearfully. This is for your own good. The pervasive dust fell everywhere, coating my desk, my clothes, my face. Immediately, a warm, metallic trickle started dripping from my nose, and I felt my lips blooming grotesquely, swelling to an alarming size. Katie screamed a guttural, desperate cry, look at her. The sub, without missing a beat, brutally shoved Katie back into her seat. Psychosomatic reaction, she stated, as if delivering an undeniable diagnosis. She believes she's dying, so her body mimics it. It was then that Tommy, sitting near me, touched his neck, his face suddenly contorted in confusion and then dawning horror. I guess he, too, was severely allergic, because his eyes, just like mine, began to swell shut at an alarming rate. I can't see. He cried, a terrifying echo of my own impending blindness. That's when everyone truly lost it. Kids, gripped by uncontrolled pandemonium, began dumping entire backpacks on the floor, throwing contents everywhere in a frenzied search. Does anyone have an EpiPen? Someone shrieked. Sarah, tears streaming down her face, her hands trembling, used her shirt to desperately wipe the blood from my nose. Please don't die, she sobbed, a desperate, repeated plea. Please don't die. Jack, a surge of desperate energy, ran to the locked door and began yanking on it with all his might. Open this right now, please, he yelled, his voice raw with frustration. The sub, a chilling, mirthless sound, actually laughed. Sit down, or you're expelled, she warned, her voice escalating to a terrifying pitch. Jack ignored her, kept yanking on the door handle, the whole frame rattling precariously. Help somebody, he screamed, his voice hoarse. Other kids, propelled by a collective, frantic terror, joined him, pounding on the door with their fists. Desperate faces pressed against the small window embedded in the door. Suddenly, a face appeared at the window. Mr. Peterson from the next classroom, his brow furrowed with concern. A fleeting glimmer of hope ignited in my fading vision. But the sub, quick as a viper, stepped directly in front of the window, blocking his view. With a disturbingly casual air, she gave a thumbs up, a deceptive charade of reassurance, before swiftly closing the blind. My heart sank as I watched him walk away, the crushing disappointment almost as physically painful as the allergy itself. This is kidnapping, Katie screamed, a furious, indignant, and damning accusation. 3 minutes left. My internal clock screamed. Blood continued to drip relentlessly from my nose onto my desk, an undeniable, gruesome testament to my deteriorating state. Tommy was clawing desperately at his throat, struggling for air. Lisa, in a corner, was violently vomiting from pure, unadulterated panic. 2 girls huddled together, their bodies shaking with uncontrollable sobs. Some kids, utterly paralyzed by primal terror, simply sat frozen at their desks, unable to move, unable to process the horror unfolding before their eyes. The sub, a chillingly detached observer of our unfolding nightmare, actually laughed again. Oscar-worthy performance, she sneered, her voice thick with macabre amusement, though a bit over the top with the fake blood, my situationship. As I choked, barely conscious, Jack tried to administer mouth-to-mouth. But Daniel, my ex, inexplicably tackled him to the ground. I know her better, Daniel snarled. Yeah, that's why you called her dramatic, Jack shot back, scrambling to his feet. Look at this, the sub remarked, utterly oblivious, as if watching a theatrical performance. She casually ate another peanut, fighting over the attention seeker. This is exactly what she wanted. I could feel myself turning blue, a horrifying cyanotic pallor spreading across my skin. Foam, thick and repulsive, bubbled at the corners of my mouth. Katie, driven by a desperate, primal fury, grabbed a chair and, with a guttural roar, smashed it against the medical cabinet. The sub, her priorities utterly twisted, grabbed Katie's wrist, her voice rising in outrage. Destruction of property, that's expulsion. She's dying, Mike yelled, tackling the sub from behind. You want to go to jail for assault, the sub shrieked, her voice unhinged, legalistic threats pouring from her lips. I'll press charges on all of you. I somehow forced myself out of my chair, but my legs buckled immediately. I couldn't even stand anymore. The fire extinguisher on the wall, a distant red beacon, became my singular, laser-like thought. I literally had to crawl on all fours, humiliatingly, desperately, just to reach it. Look at her performance, the sub cackled, now restrained by Mike and Katie. Still utterly convinced I was crawling for sympathy, my body, disassociated and alien, no longer felt like my own. 1 second, I was summoning the last vestiges of strength, preparing to hurl the heavy extinguisher at the locked door. The next, a deafening crash, ripped through the room, and I instinctively covered my face, shielding my eyes from the shards of glass that exploded inwards. The sub spun around, her face contorted in furious disbelief. Vandalism, you're going to prison. I reached through the shattered window, my arm slicing painfully on a jagged wire, my fingers frantically fumbling for the deadbolt. Stop her, the sub screamed. But Mike and Katie, heroes in that horrifying moment, held her back with all their might. With a triumphant click, I turned the lock. The door flew open, a sudden rush of fresh air and hope. I collapsed into the hallway, just as a flurry of other teachers came running, their faces a mixture of confusion and alarm. Call 911, someone screamed, their voice a collective gasp of alarm and dawning horror. From inside the classroom, the sub's chilling, delusional yells still echoed. They're all faking. This is mass hysteria. The paramedics, working with urgent, frantic precision right there in the hallway as more ambulances arrived, delivered a stark, horrifying pronouncement. I was clinically dead for 3 minutes. Miss Blade, the substitute teacher, was fired irrevocably and blacklisted from every single school in the area. Fast forward to weeks later, we were back in science class, a semblance of normalcy struggling to return, when our new teacher, his face drawn and somber, broke the news. After receiving his diagnosis of permanent partial blindness, a devastating, irreversible consequence of that day's events, Tommy had taken his own life, all thanks to Miss Blade. That's when I knew, with a profound and chilling clarity, that merely getting her fired wasn't enough. We had to destroy her. The words, unspoken but palpable, hung heavy in the air, a shared, unspoken vow as everyone sat frozen at their desks, the weight of Tommy's unspeakable tragedy pressing down on us all. Under the table, Katie's hand found mine, and she squeezed it so hard, with such desperate, shared agony, that my knuckles cracked. Her eyes, swollen and bloodshot from what I could only assume were hours of frustrated tears, held more than just the visible aftermath of anguish. Beneath the surface, a chillingly resolute glint hardened her gaze, betraying a fierce, almost vengeful anger that coiled deep within. The shrill, insistent shriek of the bell typically signaled freedom, a chaotic scramble for the doors. But on this particular day, its familiar sound seemed muffled, distant. While the other students, oblivious to the simmering tension that clung to us like a second skin, eagerly surged from the classroom. A wave of casual chatter and bustling footsteps accompanying their exit. We remained stubbornly rooted to our chairs. We waited, motionless, until the last echoing footsteps faded, and the oppressive silence of an empty room finally enveloped us. As if to underscore the gravity of her unspoken resolve, she leaned in conspiratorially, her breath warm against my ear as she hissed, a low, venomous whisper, getting Miss Lade fired. That's not even close to enough. The words, sharp as shards of glass, pierced the quiet, and I could only manage a curt, almost involuntary nod. My throat, a constricted vice, felt impossibly tight, every muscle clenching, rendering any attempt at speech a futile, painful struggle. Later that afternoon, a grim reality awaited me at the hospital. The fluorescent lights hummed with an unsettling efficiency as I was ushered into a sterile examination room for my follow-up appointment. The doctor, his face a mask of practiced concern, guided a thin, invasive scope down my throat, a cold, probing sensation that made me gag reflexively. He captured stark, unflinching images of the internal devastation, the intricate network of my throat now marred by visible scarring. Moments later, he swiveled his computer screen towards me, a stark contrast to the casual images I was used to seeing. Pointing a stylus at the magnified, vivid red and inflamed tissue, he delivered the devastating pronouncement. Your airways are permanently narrowed by 15%. 15%. How could something so vital, so fundamental to life itself, be so irrevocably altered by such an act of negligence? He then instructed me, with a somber seriousness, on the proper use of my new EpiPen. Over and over again, I was made to practice the life-saving motion, plunging the needle-like device into the resistant flesh of an orange. Each jab, a jarring reminder of my newfound vulnerability, was meticulously observed. He watched, his gaze unwavering, as I performed the precise, crucial action 3 times. Only then, with a heavy sigh, did he finally sign my discharge papers, releasing me back into a world now fraught with unseen dangers. The very next day, the familiar scent of disinfectant and stale textbooks filled my nostrils as I navigated the bustling main hallway of the school. My steps felt heavy, each one an echo of the fragility I now carried. That's when I saw him, Mr. Peterson, a figure of authority now reduced to a palpable guilt, walking directly towards me. The moment his eyes registered my presence, a visible tremor seized him. His face, usually a study in placid indifference, drained of all color, turning a ghastly white, like a ghost who'd seen its past sins materialize. Without a word, without even a flicker of acknowledgement, he abruptly pivoted, a desperate, almost comical scramble, practically bolting into the nearest empty classroom. His hurried retreat leaving an almost theatrical silence in its wake. I stood rooted to that spot, a statue of simmering fury. My fists, clenching instinctively, tightened into painful knots, my fingernails biting depressants into the tender flesh of my palms, a self-inflicted reminder of the sharp, burning betrayal. He saw me, through that transparent barrier of glass, he witnessed my agonizing struggle, my life flickering like a dying flame, and he just walked away. How could a grown man, an educator entrusted with our safety, simply abandon a child in distress, turning his back on a scene of terror and suffering? That evening, as dusk settled outside my window, casting long, melancholic shadows across my room, the insistent buzz of my phone vibrated against my bedside table, pulling me from my troubled thoughts. It was Katie, her message concise yet loaded with purpose. She was initiating a group chat, a digital assembly of every single student who had been trapped in that classroom, a silent, binding agreement among us. Almost immediately, the notifications flashed across my screen, Sarah's name appearing first, then Mike's, followed swiftly by Jack's. Even Lisa, whose visceral reaction of throwing up had etched itself into my memory, joined the burgeoning digital alliance, a testament to the shared trauma that now connected us all. It wasn't just idle chatter. There was a grave, unspoken understanding amongst us. We needed to meticulously get our story straight, to weave a coherent, unshakable narrative, to forge a united front against the inevitable reckoning that was surely, menacingly, approaching. We knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was just the beginning, and our collective memory would be our most powerful weapon. The very next morning, the stark reality of our situation solidified as my mom drove me, in a tense, hushed silence, to the imposing brick edifice of the police station. Inside, the air hung heavy with an almost palpable solemnity. The officer assigned to take my statement, a man whose expression remained stubbornly impassive, listened intently, his pen scratching rhythmically across his notepad. He kept circling back, his questions probing and precise, making me repeat, over and over again, the harrowing detail of the locked door, that crucial, damning moment of entrapment. Every single detail concerning the excruciatingly long 6-minute timeline, each second of terror meticulously accounted for, was transcribed with an almost unsettling exactness. For 2 interminable hours, I sat perched on that unforgivingly uncomfortable plastic chair, its cold, hard surface doing little to alleviate my growing unease. I recounted the agonizing sequence of events, again and again, each repetition a fresh reliving of the nightmare, peeling back layers of a memory I desperately wanted to forget, but knew I couldn't. It felt like an endless loop, a broken record of my own trauma. Then came the question, delivered with a professional detachment that felt almost dismissive. He inquired if I possessed any proof beyond the raw, collective witness statements, as if our shared experience wasn't evidence enough. What proof could there be, I wondered, beyond the chilling reality we had all endured, beyond the scars that now marked my very body? 3 days later, the sterile, echoing expanse of the school gym, usually a place of boisterous games and assemblies, was transformed into a somber, temporary memorial for Tommy. The air hung heavy with a palpable grief, a stark contrast to its usual vibrant energy. Only about half of our science class, a somber, subdued group, bravely made their appearance, their faces etched with a shared, profound sadness. The other half, perhaps out of fear, discomfort, or an inability to confront the stark reality, remained conspicuously absent, their empty seats a silent, glaring indictment. At the front, his mother, a figure of heart-wrenching anguish, stood before us, clutching his school photo as if it were a fragile lifeline. Her body racked with inconsolable sobs that pierced the quiet, cutting straight to the soul. After the last mournful attendee had shuffled out, leaving me alone in the vast, echoing space, I found myself drawn, as if by an invisible thread, to Tommy's picture display. Each photograph, a frozen moment of a life tragically cut short, resonated with a profound, aching sorrow. My fingers, trembling slightly, reached out to gently touch his smiling school photo, the smooth, cool surface a tenuous link to his memory. In that quiet, sacred moment, a fierce, unwavering vow solidified within me. I promised him, my voice a barely audible whisper against the silence, that Miss Lade, the architect of his suffering and mine, would truly, irrevocably, pay for this heinous injustice. Not just a slap on the wrist, but a full, devastating reckoning. By Monday, the whole school was indeed buzzing, a cacophony of whispers and murmurs that permeated every hallway, every classroom. However, the narrative that unfolded was twisted, distorted, and utterly infuriating. It was not at all what we had painstakingly prepared for. Instead of outrage and understanding, insidious rumors began to circulate, whispers of mass hysteria and claims that we had overreacted to nothing. Our profound trauma was being dismissed. Our shared reality trivialized, reduced to a mere collective delusion by those who hadn't endured a single second of it. During lunch, the cafeteria, usually a vibrant symphony of clattering trays and youthful chatter, became a crucible for my rage. A girl from an entirely different class, her voice dripping with dismissive contempt, dared to utter the unthinkable. She declared that Tommy was being dramatic about his blindness. Her words, delivered with a callous indifference, landed like a burning brand, igniting a furious inferno within me. My hand, acting on instinct, flung my lunch tray into the nearest trash receptacle with a resounding clatter, the plastic echoing the splintering of my composure. I turned on my heel and stomped out, the sheer force of my anger propelling me forward, knowing that if I stayed another second, I would undoubtedly do something incredibly stupid. Something I'd regret, though the thought of confronting her was almost overwhelmingly tempting. Later that afternoon, after the last bell mercifully signaled the end of the school day, Jack found me leaning against my locker, his posture radiating an awkward, almost pained discomfort. He began to stammer out a torrent of apologies, his words tumbling over each other as he recounted his desperate attempt to administer mouth-to-mouth resuscitation even when I was still, painfully, horrifyingly conscious. He explained, his voice thick with regret, that he had simply panicked, his mind a blank canvas of terror, leaving him utterly bereft of any other course of action. I managed to offer him a strained, polite "it's okay," attempting to assuage his evident guilt. Yet, beneath that placid facade, a visceral revulsion boiled deep within me. The memory, sharp and unbidden, of his mouth pressed against mine, of the intimate, horrifying invasion of my personal space while I was in the throes of choking, made my skin prickle with an unbearable, almost nauseating crawl, a chilling reminder of my helplessness in that terrifying moment. That very night, as if the day hadn't been emotionally taxing enough, my phone pinged with a notification from Instagram. It was Daniel, and what followed was a sprawling, self-indulgent message, a convoluted tapestry of excuses. He claimed to be sorry, but the sincerity of his apology felt as thin as tracing paper, overshadowed by his convoluted rationale that he was merely trying to keep everyone calm during the chaos. He audaciously asserted that he still knew me better than anyone, and that his interventions were just trying to help, painting a self-serving narrative designed to absolve himself of any real responsibility. The final straw, the absolute breaking point for my patience, arrived with his concluding line, a presumptuous invitation that we should talk in person. It was an attempt at emotional manipulation. A blatant disregard for my feelings that I simply couldn't tolerate. With a decisive, almost cathartic tap, I blocked him, severing the digital cord, refusing to allow his self-serving narrative to intrude upon my fragile peace any longer. The following day, a summons from the school nurse pulled me out of class. She greeted me with a solemn, almost overly formal demeanor, eager to review their new allergy action plan. With a practiced flourish, she presented a series of gleaming, conspicuously installed EpiPen stations, each encased in a securely locked box, strategically placed throughout the building. Each one, she carefully explained, required a special key for access. Was this true progress, I wondered, or merely a performative gesture, a reaction to a crisis rather than a genuine commitment to safety? She handed me a crisply laminated card, its surface adorned with a diagram meticulously marking the locations of these supposed life-saving devices. Yet a crucial, alarming detail immediately caught my attention, a glaring flaw in their supposedly improved system. The corresponding special keys were, I quickly deduced, exclusively stored in the main office. What good were these emergency stations if access to them was so frustratingly, dangerously restricted, requiring precious minutes to retrieve a key? Later that afternoon, as I sat on my bed, still feeling a profound, lingering weakness that permeated every fiber of my being, a weary residue from the relentless emotional and physical toll, my phone buzzed again this time, an official-looking email from the school district. A knot of apprehension tightened in my stomach as I tapped it open, bracing myself for whatever bureaucratic pronouncement lay within. The subject line, stark and impersonal, simply declared, important update regarding recent incident, and the body of the email itself, a disappointingly terse, almost insultingly brief communique, perhaps 3 sentences at most. It blandly stated that Miss Blade not mislead, but a thinly veiled, almost cowardly alteration of her name had been terminated from her position and banned from working in any school in the state due to an incident involving student safety. Protocols, the clinical language, so devoid of any true accountability, felt like a deliberate attempt to sanitize, to diminish the gravity of what had truly transpired. There was no mention, not a single word, of my agonizing 3 minutes teetering on the precipice of death. No acknowledgement of Tommy's tragic, irreversible blindness. Absolutely no reference to the raw, visceral, terrifying reality that had unfolded in that classroom. It was a whitewash, a bureaucratic erasure of the most horrifying truths. How could they possibly gloss over such profound, life-altering consequences with such cold, impersonal indifference? My mom, who had been reading over my shoulder, her body tensing with each bland, infuriating sentence, let out a gasp of pure, unadulterated fury. Without a word, her hand shot out, and with a guttural cry of frustration, she hurled her phone across the room, the device clattering against the wall with a satisfying, yet unsettling, thud. It was a tangible expression of the rage that simmered within both of us. Around 7 o'clock that evening, a resolute Katie materialized at my front door, armed with what looked like a war chest of evidence. Under her arm, she clutched a massive, ring-bound notebook, its pages thick with potential, and a bulging folder overflowing with papers. Without preamble, she strode purposefully into the kitchen, and with an almost ceremonial gravity, began to spread everything out across the pristine surface of my kitchen table, transforming it into a makeshift command center for our burgeoning investigation. Her voice, usually lighthearted, was now infused with an unwavering determination. We need to write down every single, minute detail we remember about what happened, she declared, her eyes intense, and every single symptom we're still experiencing. Her logic was unassailable, brutally clear. Because if we're really going to destroy Miss Blade, a word she uttered with chilling conviction, we need irrefutable evidence for more than just her getting fired. We need a legal arsenal, a fortress of facts, to ensure she truly pays for her crimes. Even now, days later, my hands would sometimes tremor uncontrollably, betraying the lingering shock. And a sudden, disorienting wave of dizziness would wash over me if I dared to stand up too quickly, a constant, physical reminder of the attack. Katie, with a quiet, unwavering focus, meticulously transcribed every single one of these persistent symptoms, her pen flowing gracefully across the page, capturing the raw data of my ongoing suffering in her remarkably neat handwriting. The very next morning, the school's number flashed on our caller ID, and a sense of dread tightened its grip. The voice on the other end, easing with carefully modulated concern, informed us that Principal Barfield wanted to meet with me and my mom immediately about the situation. Immediately, they emphasized, as if they were the ones who had been inconvenienced. I couldn't help but think, with a bitter, cynical twist in my gut, how about taking no peanuts allowed to an entirely new, deeply offensive level of wrong? It was beyond a mere infraction. This wasn't just a rule broken. This teacher had callously transformed a routine science class into a terrifying, visceral horror movie, a scene of unimaginable cruelty where the villain, our supposed educator, casually munched on snacks, utterly indifferent, while children quite literally gasped for their last breath, dying right before her very eyes. Upon our arrival, we were ushered into Principal Barfield's office, a space that suddenly felt charged with an almost tangible tension. He sat rigidly behind his imposing desk, his hands clasped together in a posture of grave, almost theatrical seriousness, his gaze fixed on us with an air of practiced authority. He began, his voice low and carefully measured, to lecture us on the imperative of handling this situation carefully, stressing the need to avoid making it public or, even more offensively, causing unnecessary drama for the school. His thinly veiled implication was clear. Our trauma was an inconvenience, a stain on the school's reputation, rather than a catastrophic failure of their duty of care. Before he could utter another placating, dismissive word, my mom, her eyes flashing with a righteous, uncontainable fury, shot to her feet with such explosive force that her chair toppled backward with a startling clatter, echoing her raw, visceral anger. Her voice, sharp as a knife's edge, cut through the principal's carefully constructed facade. Do you honestly believe, she demanded, her voice trembling with barely suppressed rage, that watching your own daughter gasp for breath, dying for 3 agonizing minutes, constitutes unnecessary drama? Her words hung in the air, a searing indictment of his callous indifference. And in an astonishing display of brazen audacity, he actually had the unmitigated gall to respond, his face remaining stubbornly impassive, that the school had already taken appropriate action and that we should now move forward. Appropriate action. Move forward. His words were hollow, empty platitudes, designed to sweep our agony under the rug, to erase the very memory of what had transpired, as if a life-altering tragedy could be so easily dismissed with bureaucratic jargon. 2 days later, just as the suffocating feeling of official dismissal began to settle over us, a new, unexpected lifeline emerged. Our phone rang, and on the other end was a detective, his voice calm and professional, introducing himself as Darren Budrow. He explained that he had been officially assigned to investigate potential criminal charges that reverberated with a powerful sense of justice, child endangerment, and false imprisonment. specifically leveled against Miss Lady used her true name, a small but significant detail. He arrived at our house that very afternoon, a solemn figure with a small, unassuming recorder clutched in his hand. For nearly 2 arduous hours, he meticulously took my statement, his questions precise, his focus unwavering. And then, as I recounted the chilling, pivotal moment, the exact instance when she had locked that door, sealing our fate, he abruptly ceased writing, his pen hovering motionless above the page. His eyes meeting mine with a sudden, intense gaze that communicated a profound understanding, a quiet recognition of the true horror of that detail. I looked up, meeting a gaze filled with a sudden, chilling realization. That changed everything legally, a voice declared, the words hanging heavy in the air, because that made it false imprisonment on top of everything else. It was a pivotal moment, a legal pivot from a horrifying incident to something even more deliberate, more insidious. That very night, the terror returned. I was hunched over my desk, dutifully trying to conquer a stack of homework, when suddenly the air vanished from my lungs. It wasn't just a memory, it was a physical reenactment. I was back on that classroom floor, the cold towel pressing against my skin, my muscles straining as I desperately crawled towards the door, my throat constricting with an agonizing, silent scream. It was as if a cruel, invisible hand was squeezing my windpipe, plunging me back into those desperate minutes. The panic was so overwhelming, so consuming, that I instinctively grabbed a nearby notebook and a pen. I had to get it out. Every single excruciating detail of those 6 minutes had to be externalized, laid bare on the page, before the raw, unfiltered horror of it all drove me completely insane. I scribbled furiously, a torrent of fragmented memories pouring forth, the distinct, sickly sweet taste of the peanut butter that had turned into a weapon. The warm, metallic drip of blood from my nose, a chilling counterpoint to the cold floor, and the icy, unyielding feel of the floor tiles beneath my splayed hands as I dragged my failing body forward. Each word was a small, desperate act of exorcism, a plea for release from the relentless loop in my mind. Katie, ever the natural leader, wasted no time. She rallied the troops, organizing an urgent meeting at her house, inviting everyone from our class who was willing to stand up, to fight. We gathered in her dimly lit basement, a clandestine war room buzzing with a grim determination, and meticulously began to forge a plan. Katie's vision for destroying Miss Blade was disturbingly clear, a 3-pronged attack designed to ensure she could never inflict such suffering again. First, there would be criminal charges, a righteous pursuit of justice that would see her locked away, stripped of her freedom. Second, a barrage of civil lawsuits, a financial reckoning that would systematically strip away every penny she possessed, leaving her utterly bankrupt. And finally, and perhaps most crucially, we would make sure that everyone, everywhere knew precisely the monstrous act she had committed, meticulously documenting her cruelty so that she could never, ever harm another innocent child. Katie, with an unwavering resolve, delegated tasks like a seasoned general. Mike, with his sharp analytical mind, was tasked with researching similar cases, searching for precedents, for legal ammunition. Sarah, known for her meticulous attention to detail, was assigned the crucial, delicate task of collecting medical records, the irrefutable evidence of the physical toll. And so, everyone, fueled by a collective indignation, found their purpose, their part in this unfolding drama. My mom, meanwhile, had been tirelessly searching for legal representation, a champion for our cause. She eventually located a lawyer named Ray Bellamy, whose name was whispered with reverence in circles dealing with school negligence cases. We scheduled a meeting at his downtown office, a place that radiated quiet authority. The walls, I recall, were a testament to his prowess, adorned with a dazzling array of awards and framed commendations, each one a silent promise of expertise and dedication. He explained the intricate path ahead, laying bare the legal strategy with reassuring clarity. To win, he emphasized, we needed to unequivocally prove that the school either knew or should have known that Miss Blade posed a demonstrable danger. This meant digging deep, unearthing her employment records, scrutinizing any complaints lodged against her from previous schools. Had there been warning signs, subtle tremors that were tragically ignored? The discovery process, he stated, his voice calm but firm, will be our key. It will allow us to formally request all her files, every single document. And that's when we'll truly find out if the school, in its negligence, chose to turn a blind eye to critical warnings. The aftermath of that day clung to me like a suffocating shroud. I started seeing a therapist, a kind and understanding man named Emmett Bloom, twice a week. The panic attacks had become an unwelcome, debilitating companion, triggered by the most innocuous things, the faint, lingering scent of peanut butter, a sudden, sharp click of a door locking. Emmett patiently taught me these grounding breathing exercises. Count to 4 as you inhale, hold for 4, exhale for 4. It was a small, seemingly insignificant ritual, yet, to my surprise, it actually helped a little, offering fleeting moments of respite from the swirling chaos in my mind. He validated my raw, churning emotions, telling me unequivocally that what I had endured was real trauma, profound and deeply wounding. He affirmed that my anger was not only justified but necessary, a healthy response to such injustice, and that I should never, ever feel guilty or ashamed for seeking the justice I deserved. Just a week later, the district's legal department, embodied by a stern-faced man named Gordon B.S., began its own damage control. He scheduled interviews with all of us kids who had been trapped in that classroom, summoning us to the school and pulling us out of class, one by one, like pawns in a bureaucratic game. It became glaringly, painfully obvious that his sole objective was to shield the school from the inevitable lawsuits, He relentlessly peppered us with leading questions, each one a transparent attempt to twist the narrative. Did you perhaps misunderstand? He would ask, his tone deceptively solicitous, what Miss Blade meant. Or was she merely trying to impart a valuable lesson about preparedness? He even had the audacity to ask Katie if she truly believed Miss Blade might have been planning to open the cabinet after making her point. Katie, her eyes blazing with a wretched fury, shot back. Miss Blade watched me turn blue and foam at the mouth. So what point was she trying to make, exactly, as I lay there dying? The question hung in the air, a devastating indictment of his feeble attempts at deflection. Around the same time, a local reporter named Jasper Beckwith started making calls, a persistent, inquisitive presence trying to unearth our side of the story for some sprawling investigation he was undertaking. Katie, with her innate instinct for truth, felt strongly that we should speak with him, seizing the opportunity to get the unvarnished truth out to the public. But Ray Bellamy, with his seasoned legal wisdom, urged caution. Let's wait, he advised, his voice measured, until I can ascertain the reporter's angle. Sometimes, in their pursuit of a compelling narrative, they inadvertently twist things, sometimes even making victims appear less credible, less sympathetic. 2 days later, I found myself sitting in Ray Bellamy's downtown office once more, a formidable stack of papers awaiting my signature. He meticulously explained each document, his finger tracing lines of legalese as his assistant diligently made copies of everything. He pointed to sections detailing witness statements, highlighting the chilling significance of the locked door, each detail a crucial piece of our burgeoning case. The retainer agreement, a dizzying sum, was far beyond anything my family could realistically afford, but he reassured us, we'll work out a flexible payment plan once the case has settled. My mom, her face edged with a mixture of fear and resolute determination, had to sign as well, a testament to my minor status, and I watched as her hand trembled visibly when she scrawled her name. Ray's office walls, I noticed, were a veritable gallery of his legal triumphs, plastered with newspaper clippings trumpeting cases he'd won. I idly counted 12 involving schools, each one a beacon of hope, as he calmly discussed the arcane procedures of discovery and deposition. Having 15 witnesses who saw everything unfold, he remarked, his voice resonating with quiet confidence, makes this case demonstrably stronger than most negligence cases I've handled. Just 3 days later, the school, perhaps in a performative act of contrition, announced a vigil for Tommy. During fifth period, we were all compelled to walk, a solemn procession, to the football field. A microphone had been set up at the 50-yard line, and one by one, kids stepped forward, their voices trembling with grief, sharing heartfelt anecdotes about what a wonderful friend Tommy had been. When a sophomore, his voice cracking, mentioned how Tommy had spent his last week gripped by the terrifying prospect of losing even more of his precious sight. A visceral wave of nausea washed over me. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt as though it were being squeezed in an iron vise. I had to get away. I stumbled blindly behind the bleachers, the raw, undignified reality of my grief culminating in violent retching, while everyone else remained, bathed in the flickering glow of newly lit candles. Daniel, his face a mixture of guilt and concern, followed me. I never meant to hurt you, he began, his voice laced with desperate apology, when everything happened in the classroom. I spun around, the force of my raw, unyielding anger propelling me. Calling me dramatic while I was dying. I spat, each word a shard of glass. It's something I will never, ever forgive. He stood there, frozen, his mouth agape. As I turned and walked purposefully toward the parking lot, refusing to grant him another word, another chance to absolve himself. That afternoon, Ray called me. He had officially filed records requests with the district, demanding Miss Blade's training certificates, every single email pertaining to the incident. The district, he explained, had 30 days to respond. But he tempered my nascent hope with a warning. They'll probably claim some documents are missing, or that they simply weren't kept properly. The next week, Gordon B.S. from the district, undeterred, scheduled another interview with me. Ray, unwavering in his support, insisted on being present as my lawyer, a silent, formidable guardian. Gordon, true to form, relentlessly attempted to frame Miss Blade as a singular bad teacher, an isolated anomaly deliberately sidestepping any questions about the locked cabinet, about Mr. Peterson's chilling departure. But I was no longer a frightened child. With newfound strength and a quiet resolve, I made sure to mention both the locked cabinet and Mr. Peterson's abandonment not once, not twice, but 3 times, each utterance a deliberate act of defiance, a refusal to let the truth be sanitized. Gordon, his face a mask of discomfort, simply typed notes on his laptop, meticulously avoiding my gaze. Meanwhile, Jasper Beckwith, the tenacious reporter, was making significant headway interviewing students independently. Katie informed me he'd already spoken with 5 different kids, gathering their individual accounts of what had transpired. He had even shown Katie a meticulously constructed timeline. The evidence was mounting, proving just how many opportunities adults had to intervene and prevent this tragedy from unfolding. She recounted how visibly distraught he appeared as she painted the picture of Tommy, consumed by terror, crying at the prospect of losing his sight, and the palpable fear that had gripped him during those final agonizing weeks. While I was immersed in homework, Detective Budrow called, providing a somber update on the deepening criminal investigation. He informed me that the district attorney's office was now seriously considering bringing charges against Miss Lade, specifically for false imprisonment and reckless child endangerment. Given the overwhelming weight of the accumulated evidence, the detective underscored the gravity of the situation, explaining that the severe reactions suffered by 2 other students, coupled with Tommy's devastating death, amplified the case's strength exponentially, making it far more compelling than if it had merely involved my isolated incident. My subsequent therapy session with MTT Bloom delved deep into the churning whirlpool of my anger, exploring how it felt like a corrosive acid, relentlessly eating away at me from the inside. He gently, yet firmly, guided me to a crucial realization that the ultimate goal wasn't simply to destroy Miss Lade, whatever vengeful fantasies that might entail, but rather to construct an impenetrable barrier, ensuring she should never again inflict harm upon another innocent child. Shifting my perspective in this way, focusing on prevention rather than pure retribution, offered a surprising sense of relief, a fragile calm, even as the molten core of rage continued to smolder fiercely in my stomach every single night. Gray, our resourceful attorney, had tirelessly attempted to procure the crucial hallway security footage of visual proof that would definitively show Mr. Peterson callously walking away from the scene. However, the school, in a move that initially felt like a frustrating roadblock, claimed the footage was under legal hold, a rare, almost imperceptible smile played on Gray's lips as he relayed this news, explaining that this seemingly adverse development was actually a strategic victory. Now, with the footage legally protected, they couldn't surreptitiously delete it or resort to the flimsy excuse that the cameras weren't working when the time came for disclosure. The very next morning, acting with swift precision, Gray dispatched official preservation letters via certified mail to both the school district and the substitute teacher agency. These legally binding documents emphatically demanded the retention of all records pertinent to Miss Blade. A sweeping directive that included not only her training certifications but also any and all previous complaints lodged against her by other schools. He elucidated that institutions, regrettably, have a convenient habit of losing critical papers just before trials, but now, if even a single document vanished, they would face severe criminal charges, significantly raising the stakes. That same week, the local paper published an opinion piece that sent my blood pressure soaring, igniting a furious blaze within me. The anonymous writer, with a dismissive wave of the hand, branded our entire harrowing ordeal a moral panic, shamelessly portraying Miss Blade as a mere victim of helicopter parents who, in their estimation, excessively coddle their children. They brazenly declared that allergies were overblown in this day and age and that teachers shouldn't be burdened with every little medical complaint. The online comments section beneath the article quickly devolved into an unbridled, vitriolic war zone. On one side, empathetic strangers poured out their own terrifying allergy horror stories, passionately arguing that Miss Blade belonged behind bars. On the other, a torrent of anonymous vitriol painted us as drama queens shamelessly seeking attention and a hefty payday. My mom, her face etched with grim determination, spent hours meticulously screenshotting the most vile and defamatory comments for our lawyer, while my dad, a nervous energy propelling him, paced restlessly around the kitchen, reading them aloud, his voice often trembling with disbelief and anger. The insidious reach of the online mob became terrifyingly real when Katie's parents were forced to change their phone number after someone maliciously posted it online, shattering their sense of security. Then a glimmer of hope, or rather a chilling confirmation, emerged. The comprehensive records request that Gray had diligently filed finally yielded some truly interesting stuff. It revealed that Miss Lade, to everyone's stunned disbelief, had to prior complaints from other schools, incidents that had been kept entirely under wraps, unknown to us or, seemingly, to anyone beyond the administrative circles. The first, dating back 3 years, detailed her refusal to permit a diabetic child to check his blood sugar levels. With a chilling echo of her words to me, she had dismissively told him he was being dramatic and seeking attention. The poor child subsequently passed out, tragically hitting his head on a desk. The second complaint, lodged just last year at a middle school, involved her outright refusal to allow a girl to use her inhaler during a severe asthma attack. The girl's parents, understandably horrified and incensed, immediately pulled her out of the school the following day and filed a formal complaint, yet, to our dismay, nothing ever happened. Gray meticulously made copies of every single document, adding them to our ever-growing, increasingly formidable pile of incriminating evidence. Just when we thought things couldn't possibly worsen, some misguided individual from our very own class inexplicably posted a wild, baseless theory on social media, claiming that Miss Blade was deliberately trying to kill us for insurance money. They alleged she had taken out life insurance policies on all her students, a notion so utterly fabricated and absurd it defied belief. The post, fueled by sensationalism and unchecked speculation, went viral with terrifying speed before anyone could intervene, instantly transforming us, in the public eye, into a band of delusional conspiracy theorists. Katie, horrified by the damage, managed to persuade them to take it down, but the reputational harm was already irrevocably done. News outlets, quick to seize on the controversial narrative, began dubbing us the students who cried wolf, casting a long shadow of doubt over the veracity of our legitimate claims. Gray was forced to issue a terse, unequivocal statement clarifying that we had absolutely no connection to that irresponsible post, and that it in no way represented our actual, fact-based allegations. A mere 2 days later, FedEx trucks, with their ominous presence, pulled up to all our houses, delivering thick, intimidating envelopes from Miss Blade's lawyer. A searing question burned within me. Why did the principal believe that maintaining a veneer of quiet normalcy was more critical than the near death of a student? The casual way he had dismissed our ordeal as unnecessary drama made me intensely wonder about his true motivations. Was he solely concerned with the school's fragile reputation? Or was there something far more sinister, some deeper complicity, that fueled his desire for silence? The accompanying cease and desist letters were chillingly direct, threatening to sue us for defamation if we dared to continue speaking about the harrowing events. They shamelessly asserted that we were irrevocably ruining her reputation and causing her immense emotional distress with our false allegations. My parents, understandably, were completely distraught, bordering on panic, but Gray, ever the calm strategist, immediately convened an emergency meeting at his office. He patiently explained that this was a standard legal maneuver, a blatant intimidation tactic designed to silence us, but he emphasized that we still needed to exercise extreme caution about what we shared online. This meant a complete cessation of social media posts about the case, absolutely no communication with reporters without his direct presence, and, most emphatically, no more wild, unfounded theories about insurance money. In response to this new legal offensive, we collectively decided to get hyper-organized, establishing a shared Google Drive as a central repository for all our accumulating evidence. Mike, with his meticulous nature, volunteered to take charge of scanning every single document we possessed, transforming physical papers into easily accessible digital files. Sarah, demonstrating remarkable diligence, undertook the sensitive task of managing all the medical records and doctor's notes, ensuring accuracy and confidentiality. Katie, with her innate empathy, painstakingly organized the witness statements gathered from our classmates, each one a testament to the shared trauma. And I, armed with a newfound sense of purpose, meticulously worked on constructing a precise, chronological timeline of exactly what transpired on that fateful day. Within the drive, we meticulously created dedicated folders for an array of materials, news articles that had tracked our story, damning social media screenshots, encouraging emails from our growing network of supporters, and the ever-expanding stack of weighty legal documents. Witnessing all this disparate information coalesce into an organized, tangible collection felt profoundly empowering. It made the nightmare feel less like an inescapable phantom and more like a concrete challenge we could actively confront. Life at school, however, was becoming increasingly unbearable, primarily because I found myself utterly unable to control the escalating frequency and intensity of my panic attacks. One particularly harrowing day, during chemistry class, someone innocently opened a bag of trail mix, and the faint, unmistakable scent of nuts instantly triggered a complete, visceral meltdown within me. My throat, despite not having ingested a single morsel, began to constrict violently, relentlessly closing up as a wave of suffocating panic washed over me, leaving me gasping for air. The teacher, witnessing my distress, had to urgently summon the nurse, who promptly activated my newly implemented emergency exit plan, a stark acknowledgement of my trauma that permitted me to leave any class without prior permission if I felt an anxiety attack brewing. The humiliation was scorching, having everyone's gaze fixed on me as I stumbled, then ran out of the classroom, desperately fighting for breath. The nurse, her face a picture of calm concern, handed me a paper bag to breathe into, helping to regulate my hyperventilating, and immediately called my mom to pick me up early. I missed the remainder of the school day and was now faced with the additional burden of making up a crucial test I was supposed to take. The next week was the school board meeting, a day we'd been meticulously preparing for, a date looming large on our calendars. Katie, ever diligent, had poured her heart into a 3-page statement, detailing every agonizing incident, every painful truth. She'd practiced reading it aloud countless times, her voice gaining strength with each rehearsal, aiming for absolute clarity and impact. Yet, as she finally nervously approached the microphone, a cold voice from the days cut through the expectant hush. You only have 3 minutes for public comment. 3 minutes? For a tragedy that had shattered lives, was that all our pain was worth to them? A visible tremor ran through Katie's hands as she tried to accelerate her delivery, her carefully rehearsed words blurring into a desperate scramble against the clock. But the timer, merciless and indifferent, chimed its final note, and they cut her off mid-sentence, abruptly silencing her testimony. A ripple of disbelief, then a roar of outrage, erupted from the parents in the audience. "This is a cover-up," they yelled, their voices raw with frustration. "We deserve to know what happened." One mother, her face contorted with grief and fury, rose to her feet, her voice cracking as she shouted, "My kid was in that classroom. He has nightmares every single night." Almost immediately, burly security guards began to advance, their presence a silent threat, a stark reminder of the board's power. The board president, his face stern and unyielding, threatened to clear the room, to extinguish the last flicker of dissent. If people didn't calm down, it was an absurd demand. How could one calm down when justice was being so brazenly denied? In the ensuing chaos, 3 parents were unceremoniously escorted out, among them Katie's dad, who, with a quiet defiance, had been filming the entire disgraceful spectacle on his phone. A visual record of their callous disregard. The board, in a dismissive, patronizing tone, concluded the segment by stating they'd take our concerns under advisement, a phrase that, in our collective experience, was nothing more than bureaucratic code for "we're not going to do a single thing." As we filed out of that sterile meeting room, the weight of their indifference pressed down on us. A suffocating realization that they simply didn't care about what had happened to us, about the lives irrevocably altered. We were utterly crushed. Then, finally, a call from the district attorney's office. A sliver of hope, perhaps, but it wasn't good news. In fact, it felt like another punch to the gut. They informed our parents that they were still awaiting final medical reports before even considering charges, a bureaucratic delay that felt like an intentional obstruction. The prosecutor's voice was devoid of empathy as he warned that the entire process could drag on for months, a seemingly endless legal limbo. And even if they did charge Miss Blade, he cautioned, she might very well secure a plea deal, effectively sidestepping the full consequences of her actions. Cases like this are notoriously hard to prove, he explained, because she could simply claim she had no idea how serious allergies truly were. Didn't know. After all this, my dad, listening on speakerphone, slammed his handset down so violently after that call that the screen cracked, a physical manifestation of his shattering hope and incandescent rage. We all felt a profound despair, a chilling certainty that the system was utterly failing us, leaving us with the unbearable thought that Tommy had died for nothing. But just when despair threatened to swallow us whole, a faint glimmer of light appeared. Jasper received an email, an intriguing, unexpected message that rekindled a flickering flame of hope. It was from someone who had worked alongside Miss Blade at a summer camp a decade ago. This individual, having seen the recent news stories, felt compelled to reach out. And what they revealed was chilling, yet profoundly significant. This person claimed Miss Blade used to brag about how her parents had cured her own cat allergy by locking her in a room filled with cats when she was just 5 years old. She would recount this bizarre, disturbing anecdote to anyone who dared to mention allergies, often concluding with the chilling pronouncement that that's how all allergies should be handled. The email wasn't just a vague recollection. It included specific dates and even the names of other counselors who had personally overheard her relaying these disturbing beliefs. Jasper, without hesitation, immediately forwarded it to Gray, and it was promptly added to our ever-growing evidence folder. This wasn't merely hearsay, this was concrete proof. This email undeniably demonstrated that her dangerously warped beliefs were not a recent development, but deeply ingrained, stretching back years. It unequivocally indicated that she knew exactly what she was doing to me, transforming what might have been perceived as negligence into something far more deliberate and sinister. Armed with this damning new evidence, Gray wasted no time. He officially filed our civil lawsuit, a comprehensive legal challenge against both Miss Blade and the school district. The lawsuit sought substantial damages, not only to cover the exorbitant medical costs and the profound emotional trauma we had endured, but also for the wrongful death of Tammy, whose parents joined the suit as co-plaintiffs, seeking their own measure of justice. The paperwork itself was a monumental undertaking, over 100 pages thick, meticulously detailing every single agonizing event, every consequence, meticulously spelled out in the cold, precise language of the law. Reading through it, seeing our pain distilled into legal paragraphs, was a stark, sobering experience. It was then that the true gravity of our situation hit me, a crushing realization of just how fundamentally our lives had been irrevocably altered, all because of one substitute teacher who, in her dangerous arrogance, genuinely believed she knew better than trained medical doctors. 2 days later, the fragile peace we had found was shattered. Katie texted me a link, a digital bomb that exploded in my hands, making me involuntarily hurl my phone across the room in a fit of visceral disgust. Miss Blade had posted a 20-minute video on YouTube, an audacious, self-serving monologue wherein she audaciously proclaimed herself the real victim, boldly claiming that we were all fabricating our story, outright lying about what had happened. She sat in her own living room, a picture of contrived sorrow, shedding what were undeniably crocodile tears as she droned on about how she never meant to hurt anyone and how cancel culture was mercilessly destroying her life. The comment section beneath the video was a cesspool of ignorant vitriol, a disturbing echo chamber of people declaring that kids these days are too soft and that Miss Blade was merely a scapegoat for a tragic accident nobody could have prevented. I spent the next 3 hours violently throwing up, my body reacting to the sheer injustice and callousness, while my mom, her face a mask of worry, held my hair back, silently enduring my anguish. That Friday, the district called an emergency meeting, a sudden, reactive maneuver. It quickly became clear why. They were offering us all early settlements, each one meticulously paired with a non-disclosure agreement. The stack of legal documents was thick, dense with convoluted legal jargon, but the underlying message was brutally clear. They wanted to pay us to shut up about the entire debacle, to make it all disappear quietly. The room was immediately split. Some parents, their faces etched with desperation, were already signing, their hands trembling as they accepted the checks. They desperately needed the money to cover overwhelming medical bills and the exorbitant costs of therapy. My own mom, her eyes narrowed in concentration, stared at the check amount, and I could practically see her doing the agonizing math in her head, weighing it against my own staggering hospital bills. But other parents were yelling, their voices hoarse with indignation, branding it blood money and accusing the district of trying to sweep everything under the rug before any real investigation could begin. Katie's dad, with a defiant flourish that brought the room to a stunned silence, ripped his settlement offer right there in front of everyone, scattering the pieces like confetti. The room erupted, splitting into two warring factions, arguments flying back and forth, while the district's lawyers, seemingly unfazed, sat there, impassively taking notes, like vultures watching a battlefield. It was precisely at that moment, as the tension reached a fever pitch, that our lawyer, Gordon, with a deliberate, impactful gesture, dropped a thick folder onto the table. The sharp thud echoed in the suddenly silent room, cutting through the cacophony. Inside were training records damning evidence revealing that Miss Blade had conspicuously skipped the mandatory module on recognizing and responding to anaphylaxis 3 years prior. She had, in a brazen act of deception, submitted a form claiming she already possessed equivalent training from a previous job, a claim that, staggeringly, nobody had ever bothered to verify. The district's superintendent's face, as he frantically scanned the papers, drained of all color, turning a ghostly white, a clear admission of guilt and complicity. But Gordon wasn't done. He had also unearthed a cache of emails, internal communications where administrators had blatantly ignored repeated warnings about Miss Blade's disturbing behavior at staff meetings. One teacher, clearly concerned, had written that Miss Blade seemed to enjoy having power over students far too much. Another email chillingly mentioned that she had made weird comments about allergies being made up by pharmaceutical companies. The district lawyers, their smug composure utterly shattered, immediately began whispering amongst themselves, their faces a mixture of panic and dawning horror. Before meekly requesting a recess, we sat in that sterile conference room for what felt like an eternity, to excruciating hours, while they frantically strategized, no doubt scrambling for damage control. In another room down the hall, that weekend, Mr. Peterson, his shoulders slumped, unexpectedly appeared at my house, asking to speak privately. He sat on our porch steps, the embodiment of a broken man, unable to even meet my gaze as he finally, haltingly, admitted that he had seen us through the window that day. He recounted how Miss Blade's casual thumbs up had deceptively made him believe everything was fine, and how he had trusted her implicitly, simply because she was a teacher. His hands were visibly shaking, a testament to his inner torment, as he explained how he'd been plagued by nightmares about Tommy, unable to escape the haunting question of what would have happened if he just opened the door. I looked at him, my voice devoid of pity, and told him that his guilt, however profound, couldn't undo his unforgivable choice to walk away when kids were screaming for help. He left, sobbing, but I felt no empathy for him, not an ounce. The following week, the district, in a swift and telling move, announced a series of new policies requiring all classroom doors to remain. The school environment began to shift, however subtly. During instruction, doors were now mandated to stay unlocked, a quiet acknowledgement of past failings, though the true reason remained unspoken. Adding another layer of safety, emergency EpiPens were installed in bright red, conspicuously unlocked boxes in every single classroom a stark, vibrant splash of color against the institutional walls, serving as constant reminders of the silent threat many students face daily. Principal Barfield, with a tight, almost pained smile, convened an assembly to explain these new protocols, her voice calm and measured. She meticulously outlined the updated rules, yet artfully danced around the underlying trauma that made them suddenly, desperately necessary. The elephant in the room was palpable, a heavy silence pregnant with unspoken questions, but Barfield never addressed it directly, leaving a lingering sense of unease. It felt like such a small, almost insignificant victory, considering the immense emotional and physical toll it had taken to even get to this point. The trauma was deeply ingrained, even after the school had gone to the trouble of replacing all the old desks and repainting the classroom walls a cheerful, innocuous shade. Some kids were still having debilitating panic attacks within those very same spaces. The physical changes were superficial band-aids on gaping emotional wounds. In the midst of this turbulent period, Jack started coming over after school, transforming my kitchen table into our makeshift war room. He was helping me prepare for the upcoming depositions, a daunting prospect. We'd sit there, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silences between his probing questions, and I'd try, with every fiber of my being, to answer without my voice cracking, without tears blurring my vision, or without the raw anger that often surged within me. He was incredibly patient, a steady anchor in my emotional storm, always understanding when I had to take a break, my breath hitching, just to calm my racing heart. We'd also, with surprising maturity given our complicated, unresolved feelings for each other, managed to establish clear boundaries for our relationship, agreeing to channel our collective energy solely into the case, postponing any personal discussions until later. His steady, quiet presence, despite the lingering awkwardness and unspoken tension between us, proved to be far more supportive than I could have ever anticipated. This fragile, albeit effective, arrangement shattered abruptly when Daniel, in a stunning act of betrayal, decided to leak screenshots of our private group chat. He sent them to an online blogger who was actively defending Miss Wade, twisting our words with malicious precision. He had meticulously edited the messages, carefully excising context to portray himself as a voice of reason, while making the rest of us appear as hysterical attention seekers, exaggerating our experiences for public sympathy. The fabricated narrative spread like wildfire across social media platforms, igniting a wave of vitriolic comments. We were branded crisis actors and accused of callously ruining an innocent woman's life. Our group, united in disbelief and fury, immediately voted Daniel out. His reputation at school tanked instantly when the truth of his duplicity became known. The ostracism was swift and brutal. Kids would deliberately knock his books out of his hands in the crowded hallways, and at lunch, no one would dare sit at his table, leaving him in conspicuous solitude. Even teachers, typically paragons of impartiality, couldn't hide their disgust, their gazes hardening with contempt when he entered their classrooms. During my subsequent therapy session with the MTT, we specifically focused on the powerful, almost consuming urge I felt to personally confront Miss Blade. I'd been plagued by vivid, relentless dreams, each one a relentless loop of me showing up at her house, demanding that she look me in the eye and truly understand the profound damage she had inflicted upon us. EMTT, with her gentle but firm guidance, helped me see that channeling all of that raw, volatile emotion through official legal channels was not only infinitely safer, but would ultimately accomplish far more than any impulsive, face-to-face confrontation ever could. The intense temptation to do something reckless, something that might jeopardize the entire case, began to fade, slowly, like a dying ember. Yet it never completely vanished, especially on those nights when I would bolt upright from nightmares, gasping for air, the phantom sensation of her culpability still heavy in the air. Finally, after months of painstaking investigation, Jasper Beckwith's comprehensive article was published. It was a lengthy, meticulously researched piece, and with our explicit permission, it included our real names, lending it an undeniable gravitas. Beckwith had dedicated months to piecing together every harrowing detail, including the tragic, agonizing timeline of Tommy's declining vision in his final, darkened days, and the heart-wrenching note his parents had discovered. Public opinion, which had been so fractured, shifted dramatically and irrevocably as people absorbed the poignant details of Tommy gradually losing his sight, bit by agonizing bit, and his ultimate, desperate choice to end his suffering rather than live in absolute darkness. Miss Blade's preemptive video, in which she had cried about being the real victim, now seemed like a grotesque pantomime. A bewildering display of self-pity while Tommy's grieving parents were simultaneously joining a lawsuit. That's some Olympic-level mental gymnastics right there, I thought, the absurdity striking me with a jolt. Someone give her a gold medal for missing the point completely. The article rapidly went viral, racking up millions of shares across social media platforms, even drawing posts and commentary from celebrities, amplifying its reach exponentially. Miss Blade's remaining supporters largely fell silent, their arguments crumbling under the weight of irrefutable evidence. Save for a few entrenched conspiracy theorists who clung to the delusion that the entire tragedy was an elaborate fabrication. It was during this period of shifting public sentiment that Gordon finally unearthed the smoking gun we had so desperately sought. Records surfaced revealing that Miss Blade had orchestrated a disturbingly similar incident 5 years prior at a school 3 districts away. During a tornado drill, she had deliberately locked students inside a classroom, unapologetically claiming she was imparting lessons in discipline and respect for authority. One child, overwhelmed by panic, suffered a severe anxiety attack and passed out. However, to avoid a public scandal, the school had quietly allowed her to resign, effectively passing the problem to us. They had provided her with neutral references, meticulously omitting any mention of the horrifying incident. The HR person from that other district, during a deposition, admitted with a chillingly detached shrug that they simply wanted her gone and genuinely didn't care where she went next. Their callous indifference had set the stage for our own tragedy. A mere 2 days after that bombshell deposition dropped, Miss Blade's remaining, most fervent supporters found us online. My phone, once a reliable connection to friends and family, began to incessantly blow up with a relentless barrage of messages, each one a venomous accusation. Calling me a liar and an attention seeker, Katie, meanwhile, started receiving chilling death threats on her Instagram. Gabe Bellamy, our lawyer, immediately instructed us to screenshot absolutely everything and, crucially, to under no circumstances respond to any of it. But the messages kept coming, a relentless digital assault that lasted for weeks. They accused us of destroying an innocent teacher's life, twisted the narrative by claiming Tommy killed himself not because of what happened to him, but because he was inherently weak. I blocked over 40 accounts, a Sisyphean task, only for new ones to pop up, Hydra-like, their vitriol and diminish. 3 weeks later, I found myself sitting in the sterile, oppressive atmosphere of a conference room for my own deposition. Miss Blade's lawyer, a relentless interrogator, grilled me for 4 excruciating straight hours. He circled back to the same question, reframing them in myriad ways, all in an insidious attempt to make me contradict myself or admit that I was simply being dramatic. But I clung to the unyielding facts, describing with painstaking raw detail exactly how I had crawled across the cold linoleum floor, the warm, metallic drip of blood from my nose, the terrifying, suffocating sensation of my throat closing up. Miss Blade sat directly across from me the entire time, her face a mask of stone, her eyes fixed on mine. But as I described, with visceral clarity, crawling on my hands and knees, the color slowly drained from her face, leaving her pallid and suddenly vulnerable. It was a tiny flicker of recognition, perhaps of horror, that caused her lawyer to abruptly call for a recess. 2 months later, the district attorney's office called us with news that finally felt like a tangible step towards justice. They were filing criminal charges. Miss Blade was formally arraigned on 2 counts of reckless child endangerment and 1 count of false imprisonment. She arrived in court wearing a carefully chosen gray suit, a flimsy facade of professionalism she hoped would project an image of respectability. However, after she defiantly pleaded not guilty, the authorities still placed her in handcuffs. The judge set her bail at $50,000, which she posted that very same day, securing her release. But seeing her in those cold, metallic cuffs for just that fleeting moment felt like the first real, undeniable victory we'd had. Soon after, the school district's lawyers approached us with a significantly larger settlement offer. This would cover all our accumulated medical bills, plus therapy for the next 5 years, a substantial sum, a tacit acknowledgement of the immense suffering we had endured. However, it came with a stringent non-disclosure agreement (NDA) that would effectively muzzle us, prohibiting us from speaking publicly about what had happened, except for general discussions about policy. Katie and I spent 3 grueling days in intense, back-and-forth negotiations with their legal team, adamantly pushing for additional language that would allow us to speak at schools about allergy safety and advocate for improved training. They repeatedly said no, maintaining their firm stance until we collectively threatened to reject the entire settlement and force the case to trial, a prospect they clearly wished to avoid. Finally, the lawyers caved, conceding to our demands and adding the crucial carve-out we wanted. They also included a substantial sum to establish a foundation in Tommy's name, ensuring his memory would live on, transforming tragedy into a beacon of advocacy. The school, a week later, held a mandatory assembly. A moment of silence was observed for Tommy, a gesture that felt more performative than heartfelt. Indeed, during the somber silence, nearly half the kids were discreetly, or not so discreetly, on their phones, their faces illuminated by the screens. Others whispered, their hushed tones carrying enough to hear them dismiss our pain, saying we were being dramatic. One kid actually said out, so loudly that it seemed to mock us, as if Tommy's burgeoning depression, which we now understood was an ongoing battle for him, was merely a convenient excuse for her blatant disregard. It was a calculated dismissal, designed to shift blame and minimize the terrifying reality unfolding before our eyes. The visceral horror of that moment overwhelmed me. I stumbled out, my stomach churning with a mixture of fear and disgust, barely making it to the bathroom where I violently retched. Meanwhile, Katie, with a terrifying presence of mind, remained rooted, her phone's lens fixed on the escalating chaos, capturing every damning second, a silent testament to the unfolding tragedy. Barely a month later, the State Board of Education convened, the air thick with tension, and the immense weight of their impending decision. After reviewing the irrefutable evidence, they voted not just decisively, but unanimously, to permanently revoke Miss Lake's teaching certificate. It was a definitive, unappealable judgment, stripping her of the very credential that had once granted her authority and access to impressionable young minds. This condemnation wasn't merely a private reprimand. It was etched into the public records database, an indelible mark. Any future school, any administrator, even a curious parent performing a routine background check, would forever stumble upon the stark scarlet letter, a digital scarlet letter, signaling her unsuitability for the profession. The breadth of the revocation was absolute, extending far beyond the public school system. She was expressly forbidden from holding any position of authority over minors, effectively barring her from private institutions, tutoring roles, or even informal educational settings. It was a legal moat, meticulously constructed to ensure she could never again wield power over a child's well-being. It was at this point, faced with the irreparable wreckage of her career, that Miss Lade, with audacious audacity, filed a wrongful termination lawsuit against the very district that had fired her. Her legal documents painted a narrative of self-preservation, alleging that she was nothing more than a convenient scapegoat, sacrificed to cover up the district's own systemic failures in adequate staff training and oversight. And in a cruel twist of irony, her official filing didn't stop at implicating the district. It brazenly, unforgivably accused us, the very children who had witnessed Tommy's struggle and survived her neglect, of being nothing more than manipulative adolescents. We were, in her eyes, orchestrators of a fabricated performance, cunningly designed to garner attention and maliciously dismantle her career. Can you imagine the sting of such a betrayal, to be vilified for simply telling the truth? Late one night, well past 2 a.m., in the oppressive stillness of my room, a morbid curiosity or perhaps a desperate need to understand the depths of her denial compelled me. I stumbled upon her entire legal filing online, and, with a growing knot of dread in my stomach, I devoured every single word, page after agonizing page. Each paragraph was a carefully constructed fiction, a distorted mirror reflecting her self-serving narrative. She meticulously painted herself as the tragic victim of a cruel injustice, while simultaneously casting us, the terrified witnesses, as calculating, scheming brats who had meticulously planned the entire performance simply to destroy her livelihood. The audacity was breathtaking, the lies, infuriating. By 4 a.m., the weight of her venomous accusations had crushed me. EMTT, my guardian angel, found me crumpled on my bedroom floor, tears streaming down my face, the glowing screen of my laptop still displaying the hateful document. Without a word, they gently but firmly took my laptop, then made me promise, their voice laced with concern, to completely disengage from any further online exploration of the case. They understood the insidious damage it was inflicting. To ensure my digital detox, EMTT proactively installed blockers across all my devices, creating a necessary firewall against the toxic narrative. More importantly, they guided me to a therapist, a kind and understanding professional who specialized in healing the deep-seated trauma inflicted by abuses of power from authority figures. It was a lifeline, offering a glimmer of hope in the overwhelming darkness. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of negotiations and revisions, we convened with our legal team for one last, momentous meeting. The air in the conference room was charged with a quiet sense of triumph as we signed the settlement papers, meticulously reviewing each clause to ensure every single one of our proposed changes and demands had been incorporated. This wasn't just a legal document. It was a tangible victory, hard-won and deeply personal. The monetary component of the settlement was substantial, designed to comprehensively cover all our ongoing medical expenses, alongside years of much-needed therapy, a vital investment in our long-term healing. Crucially, the agreement included a provision that allowed us to continue speaking openly about Tommy's tragic passing and Miss Late's egregious actions. The only stipulation was a strategic one. Our public discourse had to remain focused on advocating for systemic safety reforms, rather than directly attacking the school district. This approach ensured our message would be constructive, impactful, and ultimately far more effective. Of course, this wasn't perfect justice. Could anything truly atone for the loss of a vibrant young life? Nothing, absolutely nothing, could ever bring Tommy back to us. But in that moment, holding those signed papers, we knew we had secured something profoundly real, something tangible and meaningful that we had fought tooth and nail for, and against all odds. We had one. It was a foundation upon which we could build, a testament to our resolve. That very night, fueled by a potent blend of grief and determined resolve, the gears of our nascent movement began to turn. Katie, ever the meticulous strategist, immediately pulled out her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she began to draft a powerful, concise mission statement. Simultaneously, Sarah, with a focus that belied her years, was already compiling an exhaustive list of every single school board meeting scheduled across the entire state, laying the groundwork for our future advocacy. Meanwhile, Jack, tapping into his artistic talent, was sketching a profoundly meaningful logo, Tommy's initials elegantly intertwined within a medical cross, a symbol of healing, remembrance, and urgent intervention. And I, armed with a fresh notebook and a searing memory of every agonizing detail, began the arduous task of meticulously outlining every single flaw, every critical omission, and every proposed change we envisioned for emergency protocols within schools. No detail was too small, no potential safeguard overlooked. The very next week, moving with an almost feverish urgency, we officially filed the extensive paperwork required to establish Tommy's Law as a recognized 501c3 nonprofit organization. Simultaneously, we launched our social media accounts, and to our astonishment, the message resonated with an immediacy we hadn't dared to anticipate. Within mere days, our platforms had garnered thousands of passionate followers, a testament to the collective hunger for change. Our inaugural school board meeting, a monumental step for us, was held a daunting 3 towns away. We piled into Sarah's mom's minivan, the back filled with boxes of meticulously designed flyers, our own hearts thrumming with a mixture of terror and fierce determination. The drive felt impossibly long, each mile bringing us closer to a confrontation we were both dreading and yearning for. When my turn came, I walked to that intimidating podium, my legs feeling like lead, my voice initially a whisper. But as I began to speak, the words found their strength, flowing from a place of raw, unvarnished truth. I recounted, with agonizing detail, the horror of watching Tommy's eyes swell shut, his face turning a sickening shade of blue, all while our teacher, oblivious or indifferent, continued to casually eat her peanuts and, inexplicably, laughed at our desperate pleas. Then Katie, with a solemn resolve, played the damning video. It was a short, shaky clip, secretly recorded by another student on their phone before the teacher, realizing the evidence, confiscated it. But those brief, gut-wrenching seconds, projected for all to see, spoke volumes, vividly illustrating the unfolding emergency and the teacher's callous inaction. Sarah followed, her voice steady and clear, as she delivered a chilling litany of statistics, the grim, undeniable truth of how many children, just like Tommy, tragically succumb to severe allergic reactions within the supposed safety of school walls each year. The numbers were not abstract, they were heartbreakingly real, painting a stark picture of a systemic failure. Finally, Jack stepped forward, shifting the focus from the pain of the past to the promise of a safer future. He unveiled our comprehensive proposal, a demand for mandatory, unlocked medical cabinets, easily accessible to all, stocked with life-saving medication, and a requirement for quarterly, hands-on emergency training for all school staff, not just a select few. This wasn't just a suggestion, it was a blueprint for survival. The tension in the room was palpable, but as the final words of our presentation hung in the air, a momentous shift occurred. Without a moment's hesitation, the board voted an emphatic, unanimous yes. Right there, in front of everyone. A wave of collective relief and raw emotion swept through the audience. Parents, many with tears streaming down their faces, openly wept, not just for Tommy, but for the countless children who would now be safer. That month became a blur of travel and advocacy. We went on to present our case to 12 more school districts, and in a testament to the undeniable urgency and common sense of our reforms, every single one of them, without exception, passed Tommy's Law. The momentum was building, a powerful ripple effect spreading across communities. The local news, sensing the profound impact of our work, quickly picked up our story, broadcasting our efforts far beyond our immediate vicinity. Suddenly, our phones began to ring off the hook calls not just from neighboring towns, but from schools in other states, eager to understand the practical steps for implementing Tommy's Law within their own systems. Our grassroots movement was blossoming into a national imperative. Our efforts culminated in an invitation to speak at a national education conference, a cavernous auditorium filled with thousands of educators and policymakers. While the opportunity was immense, the emotional toll remained heavy. As I stood on that vast stage, recounting Tommy's story, the familiar, suffocating tightness in my chest returned. I had to excuse myself twice, to retreat backstage and desperately use my inhaler, a stark reminder that even as I advocated for others, the trauma of that day still gripped me. Throughout it all, Sarah's mom was our unwavering anchor. She tirelessly drove us to every single meeting, across countless miles, her minivan becoming our mobile command center. She meticulously prepared sandwiches and snacks for our long car rides, ensuring we were nourished, and never once, not even subtly, did she breathe a word of complaint about the astronomical gas money or the sacrifices she was making. Her support was a silent, powerful testament to her belief in our cause. Katie, ever the organizer, maintained a meticulously updated spreadsheet, a living document tracking every single school district that had officially adopted our life-saving protocols. The numbers were astounding. By the end of just the third month, that spreadsheet proudly tallied over 200 schools. A monumental achievement that spoke volumes about the widespread need and the efficacy of our work. Jack, utilizing his burgeoning network and persuasive skills, secured crucial meetings with state legislators. These weren't mere discussions, they were pivotal engagements that led directly to lawmakers beginning the intricate process of drafting actual state laws, mandating comprehensive allergy training and emergency preparedness for all educational institutions. Our local efforts were now shaping statewide policy. I remember standing before a formidable legislative committee at the state capitol, my voice echoing in the grand, formal chamber. In my pocket, I clutched my own EpiPen, a constant, tangible reminder of Tommy's fate and the reason I was there. My hands, despite all the practice and resolve, trembled visibly throughout my entire testimony, a silent testament to the enduring fear and the weight of the responsibility I carried. 6 months have now passed since that horrific day, but its shadow still lingers. I find myself compulsively checking every single food label, not just once, but twice, with an almost obsessive vigilance before consuming anything. And as a matter of habit, I now carry 3 EpiPens, strategically distributed across different pockets, a constant, tangible reassurance in a world that still feels fraught with hidden dangers. My therapist assures me that the haunting nightmares, vivid, terrifying replays of Tommy's blue lips and the desperate foam around his mouth will eventually fade into less frequent, less potent memories. Yet, even now, I still sometimes jolt awake in the dead of night, gasping for breath, the phantom images momentarily as real as the air in my lungs. Justice, it seems, takes many forms and often moves at a glacial pace. Miss Lade's criminal trial is finally slated to begin next month. The prosecutor, with a quiet confidence that reassures us, believes we have an exceptionally solid case, mounting compelling evidence for charges of criminal negligence and even false imprisonment. Given her active obstruction of help, just recently, Tommy's parents sent us a deeply moving letter, a heartfelt expression of gratitude for everything we've tirelessly worked to achieve in his name. Yet, the bittersweet reality remains. At his memorial service just last week, his mother, a woman forever marked by an unbearable loss, could not stem the relentless tide of her tears. The void he left is an eternal one. The suffocating, all-consuming rage that once threatened to drown me, a constant companion in the immediate aftermath, no longer holds me captive. But it hasn't vanished entirely. It still flares a sharp and bitten spark whenever I catch a glimpse of peanut butter jars gleaming innocently in grocery store aisles, or worse, when I overhear teachers dismissively complaining about overprotective parents. Those moments are sharp reminders that the fight for understanding and vigilance is far from over. No, we couldn't reverse time, couldn't rewrite that dreadful day, couldn't bring Tommy back to us. That painful truth is etched into our very souls. But through our collective efforts, our unwavering resolve, we have undeniably achieved one profound, unassailable victory. We have ensured that Miss Lade will never again possess the power, the authority, or the opportunity to inflict such devastating, unforgivable harm upon another innocent child. That, at least, is a justice we could deliver.